Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, it's time to talk about crab cakes and football because, Tony, as we learned in a movie a while ago, that's what Maryland does.
What movie?
It was the one with Vince Vaughn. I think it was Wedding Crashers. Wasn't it with Wedding Crashers? And then there was the thing and they went to go be with the rich family and they were playing football in the backyard and the guy yells crab cakes and football. That's what Maryland does. And really, as we've learned over the years, Tony, that's only half true.
Yeah, I don't recall crab cakes being there. So yes, this is, as we've been telling you for the last week, it is Maryland week. Ohio State hosting number 26 Maryland. Tom, if you weren't aware, they're right there on the cusp of being as good as a 2-loss SEC team dare to dream.
Of all those receiving votes, they are the best of the others, which is, I mean, number one among the others receiving votes is pretty prestigious.
That's like being ranked number one overall. Kind of. So, as long as you don't look too deep into it, I mean, they're at the top of that section of the rankings. Anyway, Maryland has 3 wins over FBS teams. Not everybody can say that. They are one of 7 teams nationally that have won all 5 of their games by double digits. And Tom, I would give you a shiny dollar if you could name the other 6, but it might take a while, and that's not what the show is about. It's not about taking a while.
Michigan.
That's 1.
Penn State.
That's 2.
I'm going to say Washington, Oregon. Both of them have...
No,
neither.
Well,
anyway, on with the show.
I don't remember all of them, and I don't think Oregon was. Washington just won 31-24 last week.
Oh, yeah.
But Oklahoma and Texas are 2 of the others. And then there's, I forget, maybe like an Air Force or something of that nature. I don't know if it's specifically Air Force, but it's like an Air Force. Not militarily, but...
Does the Space Force have a football team? Anyway, I think we might be drifting off into space right now. So, speaking of space, how about Maryland? There's some space there.
Maryland is known for 2 things: space and crab cakes, and also a pretty bad schedule. And they are 5-0. Like I said, they are doing everything they should be doing against the likes of Towson, Charlotte, Virginia, at Michigan State, and at Indiana. If that was a poker hand, it would be like all 2s and 3s, but not actually. It'd be like 2, 3, 4, 9, something like that. Like, you can't do anything with these things, no consecutive numbers or whatever, but they've done what they should do against them. And now Maryland is at this point where they've been before. Now you have to do what everybody's waiting for you to do. Beat one of Ohio State, Michigan, or Penn State. And I think if this game was at Maryland, it might be the biggest game in school history. Here at Ohio State, being in Columbus, for Maryland, it might just be, it's still a great opportunity, but I wonder how many people are giving Maryland a chance in this one.
Well, I was a little surprised at the line. The last time I looked at the line, it was like 19.5 or 20.5 or something like that. That feels like a lot of points, which the line being that high makes me think that no one is giving Maryland a chance. And that might be a function of the fact that it feels like we have seen this movie before. It feels like this is, Maryland beats Texas in September, and oh boy, is this the year that and then you get to October and they play Penn State, and it's, it is the biggest game in the history of Maryland football, and it is 35-0 Penn State at halftime, and then it is no longer the best of Maryland football, the best, greatest game in Maryland football history. It just feels like every year somehow we are sitting, in a restaurant on the road on a Friday night, and it is this game for Maryland. And I think we've seen it happen with Penn State. I think we saw it happen with Iowa a couple of years ago when we were at Rutgers. It just feels like every year that Maryland gets off to a hot start, it's like, oh man, October's here, and if Maryland can just, no, they can't. Okay, no, they can't. Well, if they could have, it would have been big, but they couldn't. So they very well might be the fourth best team in the Big Ten, regardless of division. But that just makes them the fourth best team in the Big Ten East. And if they can't get over the hump with one of the three teams ahead of them, that's probably going to be pretty frustrating for Maryland fans.
Absolutely. And you can't necessarily expect to win on the road. The good news for them is that they get Penn State and Michigan at home. Now, you still have to play them, but it's better to get them at home than on the road. Tom, do you remember back in 2018, Maryland rushed for 339 yards against Ohio State?
I do remember that, and I gotta say, at the time, it felt like more than that.
It did. And you mentioned that these games have kind of gotten to be like we've seen this movie before with Maryland coming to Ohio Stadium. But even with the games at Maryland, the last three times they've played, so it'd be 2022, 2021, and 2019, because they did not play in 2020. The last three times they've rushed for a total of 202 yards against Ohio State. And I don't think there's any reason to expect them to do more than that. You know, they may rush for 100 yards, but I don't expect them to move the ball in that way against Ohio State this week, given that, you know, they would love to run the ball, but they're more of a passing offense. That's what people think of them as. And right now, if you just look at their yards, they're doubled up in passing yards as opposed to their rushing yards. Now, they've done some good things in the rushing game, but not really anything to concern anybody.
No, this is a team that if they're going to beat you, they're going to beat you with the pass. I mean, the rushing game is fine, but unspectacular is probably a good word. Roman Hemby averaging 4.8 yards per carry, Antwain Littleton 4.4 yards per carry. And even if you want to look at the more advanced stats, this is something I talked about earlier in the week on the Michigan Monday show. The College Football Nerds podcast does a comparison of what you do versus a team versus what they do on average against everyone else they play. So, you know, that sort of adjusts for level of competition, because if you're playing a bad team, well, everyone else is playing that same bad team. So you're competing against the other teams that have played that team. And Maryland's offense, it's fine. They are, in terms of rushing yards per attempt, 39th in the country by that metric. Passing yards per attempt, 35th in the country by that metric. Like, they're fine, they're good, but I think they've been kind of bolstered by playing some kind of lousy defenses. So, you know, and Ohio State, by those same metrics, that Ohio State defense, passing yards per attempt, 8th in the country in terms of what they do versus what those teams do on average. Rushing yards, 18th. So Ohio State should have an advantage on both sides of the ball against Maryland, just by, you know, at least certainly by that metric. And, you know, in terms of what Maryland does when Maryland's on offense. And when Maryland's on offense, that's the side of the ball where they should have the gap should be closer with Ohio State. So that, I think, is a little bit concerning, because, you know, Maryland being 5-0 is great. That's a fantastic start for Mike Locksley. He should be very happy. Maryland fans should be very happy. It just feels like if you dig into the numbers a little bit more, there's some kind of concerning stuff underneath all that.
Maryland has, I think, 3 rushes of 30 yards or more this year. Not the most explosive bunch of backs. Now, I do like Roman Hemby. He's experienced. He's solid. But like you said, the 4.8 yards per carry, that's not good enough to be a Big Ten statistical leader. Like, you're not going to worry anybody. They do possibly get back Colby McDonald, who's averaging like nearly 8 yards a carry, missed last week, and is like their number 3 back, who is maybe a little bit more explosive than the other guys. And you watch the way Notre Dame mix their running backs against Ohio State, maybe you'll see something similar from Maryland, just to give different looks. I do wonder how much you try to mirror or just borrow what Notre Dame did in terms of the tight ends and creating extra gaps for the running game, or if you're just to the point where, like, we are what we are. We're not going to do anything. You know, we're going to execute what we know how to do. And I think you you may not borrow anything from Notre Dame, but you see what gave them issues, and you see what gave Ohio State issues, and it's like, what do we do that would pose those kinds of problems, and let's do that.
I think that's exactly the right approach. You're not changing what you do, you're tailoring what you do to what has worked against Ohio State in the past. And, Ohio State having had a week off to maybe address some of those issues, some of the stuff that worked against Ohio State 2 weeks ago might not work, at least not work as well as it did against Ohio State 2 weeks ago. And I think there's also a question of the talent level at Maryland versus the talent level at Notre Dame overall, maybe not being quite at that same level. So there are certainly some areas of concern. But, when we talked to the Buckeyes earlier in the week, a bunch of guys talked about how this is going to be, in terms of RPO, the kind of offense that runs that far more than anyone else that they've seen this year. Western Kentucky ran a bunch, but Maryland is much more RPO heavy than any other team that they've faced. And there's a lot of, there was a lot of talk about eye discipline, staying on your keys, all that kind of stuff. Maryland has not played great defense. They've put up some impressive numbers, but the opponent adjusted stats being as, okay, but not spectacular as they are, that tells you that maybe some of that is you've played some bad defenses and you've played some defenses that maybe give up some big plays. Maryland has put up a ton of big plays. Ohio State has not given up any big plays. And I think the key to this game for Maryland is I don't think they're going to be able to put up repeated 12-play drives. It feels like their offense kind of has to hit the big play in order to put up big numbers. And with Ohio State's defense being as solid and giving up as few big plays as they have this year, that might be one of the single biggest deciding factors in how this game goes.
Yeah, and the big plays, I think, are going to have to come from the passing game, which means you're going to have to attack downfield, which is where the Buckeyes have been outstanding. You would assume you're going to have to target some cornerbacks, and they've been pretty good this season. I do think if you're giving Talia Tagovailoa his druthers, you maybe go after Davis Nigbinosin and just move it 15 yards at a time, perhaps, on these pass interference penalties, or maybe a 10-yarder on a holding, something like that. But I think Maryland has seen how difficult it has been for teams to move the ball down the field in 12 plays, that I do wonder if they start thinking, you know what, let's take some shots, because again, I don't know that Notre Dame did enough play action to convince me that I don't think they did enough play action. I don't know that Maryland has the kind of running game to do that, but the run pass option is basically a form of play action, but it actually gives you the option of actually handing the ball off and just creating some conflicts there. So that could lead to some big plays. I know you talk to the corners and they're like, hey, as long as you just defend your man, nothing can go wrong. And well, that is true, but you still have to defend your man. And then they've done very, very good job of that. Denzel Burke, we know. Jordan Hancock in the slot is going to be something to watch as well. And Talia Tagovailoa will throw it all over the place. Jordan Hancock has been a guy that was targeted in the past. We'll see. He's continued to get better, obviously, and this is a learning process for him. But these three guys are going to be instrumental, because that run pass option, the RPO stuff, they have to be sound. And Tagovailoa is going to have to look at the tight end. He's going to have to look elsewhere, look to the backs at times. But those guys are still going to get targeted, because you have to, because these are your receivers. This is how you're going to move the ball downfield in chunks. So it's not like you're just going to avoid them.
You're not going to avoid them. You're going to get thrown at. And it's so interesting to see people throwing at Denzel Burke, because it feels like that has just not happened for big chunks of the season. And this is a game where if you're going to throw the ball, you're going to have to throw the ball at Denzel Burke at times. And so that's going to be really interesting to see what he does with that, because he's been just so solid that he really hasn't been tested that much this year. With RPOs, not 100% of the time, but a large chunk of the time, that is not a, do I hand it to this guy or do I pull it and then wait 3.5 seconds for the guy to run 40 yards downfield and throw? A lot of times that's pull, throw, get it out quick. And if it is pull, throw, get it out quick, then the issue is not necessarily, you want to break up the pass or intercept the pass or get a hand on the pass or whatever it is. But it's also get that guy on the ground. If it's a little bubble, if it's a little slant, if it's just, a little quick 6-yard pass, it's an 8-yard curl, whatever it is. If you have to, obviously you're trying to break up the pass, and those 3 guys are going to be doing their best to get. I mean, we've heard all fall about having their hands on footballs. So, okay, this is a weekend where you might get to see that in action. But also, if those guys catch it, if the receivers catch it, there's a lot of guys on this Maryland team averaging 16 yards per reception. There's Jashawn Jones, 16.8, Ty Felton, 16.6, Hayden Prather, 14.1. Preston Howard, he's only had 3, but he's 17 yards per reception. You have to, if it's a little 5-yard slant, it can't turn into 17 yards. You got to get that guy, and it's a 5-yard slant. Okay, get him on the ground, and it's a 7-yard gain, and now it's 2nd and 3, and now they got to do it again. And that's going to be one of the big keys: is get your hand on footballs, break up some of those plays, but also just don't let the small plays turn into big plays. And that's been something Ohio State's defense has been really, really good at so far this year.
Yeah, get the guy down, because you're going to give up catches. Just don't give up the run after the catch. The other side of the ball, the Ohio State passing game against the Maryland pass defense. Maryland leads the Big Ten, is tied for Big Ten lead with 8 interceptions this season, tied with Minnesota. So arguably the 2 best defenses in the Big Ten right there, Tom, picking those balls off.
Arguably, yes.
Arguably, if you want to make that argument, I'm not sure I do. They had 3 interceptions against Virginia, 3 interceptions against Michigan State. I argue, who hasn't? Only 1 interception last week against Indiana. But as we have heard, this is a very good secondary. Marvin Harrison said, I think he said last year was perhaps the best set of corners they faced all year. Deonte Banks, first-round corner, was probably the best cornerback they faced last year. A little shade towards Joey Porter Jr., perhaps. I don't know, maybe. But this is a pretty decent Maryland pass defense in terms of like the individual talent and what they've done. Now, overall, I'm going to give Ohio State the advantage in this, but this is a pass defense that I think it is. Let me see here. It's middle of the pack in terms of pass efficiency defense. They're giving up 60% completions, basically, 211 yards per game. That is whatever it is. But for Ohio State, I think the passing game here this is an opportunity for Kyle McCord to not necessarily pick up where he left off against Notre Dame, but to start something new, to start a new trajectory or continue the upward trajectory. They're going to play 8 Big Ten games in 8 weeks, 9 if they go ahead and do well enough in those 8 games. And this is kind of like the beginning of his ascension to the top of the Big Ten charts. If it's going to happen, this is the game where you may need to score more points than normal, but also you probably aren't even thinking about that. You're just going out there and executing. And if he executes the way the offense should allow him to, then Kyle McCord should have a pretty good day and be once again on the national stage as you are the Ohio State quarterback. Look at the numbers you had. People know you now. Now you have to, as Ryan Day said, when I came home with an A+ in algebra, that was the point where now it's expected that you always come home with an A+ in whatever math class. It's time for Kyle McCord to come home with another A+ in this one.
And, his performance at Notre Dame was he got the win and he drove him down the field. That was not an A+ performance. I don't think Kyle McCord would tell you it was an A+ performance. But, you're progressing. Progressing is really all you're looking for here. This is not the final exam. This is, is this even a midterm? This might be the quiz before the midterm. I think the midterm's coming in a couple weeks against Penn State. But this is an okay Maryland defense. I'm going to read you off the statistical ranks from the opponent adjusted stuff, because this is the one area. There's a lot of green on these charts. And again, you can find these at collegefootballnerds.com. There's a lot of green on these charts, which means, hey, you're above average. So you're above average and your teams do worse against you than they do against all their other opponents. Maryland, there's a bunch of red on Maryland's chart. That is not good. They are 62nd in the country in passing yards per attempt allowed by their opponents, 98th in the country in rushing yards allowed by their opponents. Now, there's a little bit of a denominator problem there for Maryland, where their opponents have been so bad running the ball that you're giving up 3.3 yards per carry. But that's so, the opposition has been so bad that that's actually a little bit worse than they do normally. You're not getting gashed on the ground, but it's also, they have not really been tested on the ground very much. So this will be an interesting week to look at what does the Ohio State rushing attack look like. I don't think this is a game that's going to be won on the ground, but I think that's going to be an interesting storyline to watch because this is not a Maryland defense that's just an incredible lights out defense. This is not a Maryland defense that's going to be as good as the Notre Dame defense. So can Ohio State get into, high 30s, low 40s? I'm not expecting 62 points or whatever they've hung on Maryland in the past. Can they get to 38? Can they get to 42 points against this Maryland team? Because Maryland, one of the interesting things about their statistical profile is they are just kind of okay in pretty much everything. And then they're really good. They're 24th in the country. 39th in the country in points allowed per game. 96th, 95th, 62nd, 98th. So they've kind of gotten people moving the ball on them, but not necessarily scoring. So can Ohio State finish the drill in the red zone? Are they kicking field goals? Are they going for it on fourth down and not making it? Or are they scoring touchdowns? Because it feels like they're going to get down to the red zone, 5-6 times during the course of the game. If you're scoring sevens there, you're in the 40s and this is probably a comfortable win. If you're kicking field goals, and we have seen that happen to Ohio State at times. Think back to a bunch of times in 2021, the Nebraska game in 2021, the Penn State game in 2021. You're kicking a bunch of field goals and you're dominating the game, but it's not showing up on the scoreboard really. And that's where you can get into trouble.
Yeah, they're number 2 in the Big Ten in touchdown red zone percentage defensively. They've allowed 6 touchdowns and 15 red zone chances. Amazingly, Michigan has only allowed 1 touchdown and 8 red zone opportunities, which is ridiculous. But a lot of these numbers for Maryland, they're in the middle of the pack defensively in a lot of things. And given that schedule, they should be higher than middle of the pack. And so when you see that they are middle of the pack, that means some things. The run game for Ohio State, it was interesting to me on Thursday. Ryan Day talked about he's looking forward to seeing Mayan Williams get going this week. Mayan Williams being a name that has not been mentioned around these parts in a while. I wish I had heard that before I made a bold prediction about Chip Trayanum going for 99 yards. But I digress. The addition of Mayan Williams, for one, Ryan Day on the lightning round session with reporters said there's no injuries or anything with Mayan. He's just had a really good week of practice. So what are you expecting then from Mayan? Because what does a really good week of practice, and I'm looking forward to seeing him out there. Is he the second back out there? Maybe. But what does this mean in terms of carries if this game is close? If I put the over-under at like 6.5.
I love that we've been doing these shows way too long because you're saying I'm going to put the over-under at, and I'm thinking I think it's probably going to be around 6, and then boom, 6.5. So I guess I'm going to take the under. Like if this is, close game, if this is a 2-score game late in the game, 6 carries, something like that. I don't think they want to pull Travion Henderson off the field for an extended time. I don't think they want to pull Chip Trayanum off the field entirely. So, and I don't think they want to just be running the ball like they're trying to run out the clock. That's not what this offense is. So there are only so many carries to go around. I wonder if this is a situation where, the first couple weeks of the season, Mayan Williams wasn't getting a ton of carries, but he was sort of like the touchdown vulture where he would come in and I think he scored a couple of touchdowns. Was it 2 touchdowns against Indiana? Or, he scored, there was a game early where he scored just a couple. He came in and he had, 9 yards rushing, but he had 2 touchdowns. I wonder if it's, he's getting used in the goal line situations, if they're in that kind of spot. I don't think this is a team with, between the smaller number of snaps, between the number, the amount of talent they have on the offense, the number of talented skill players they need to get touches, and the fact that they are rotating 2 and possibly 3 running backs. I just don't think you're going to see more than 6 or so carries for Chip or Mayan.
And even when Mayan was playing, or in the first 3 games, I think he had 7, 6, and 5 carries. Against Notre Dame, he had 1 carry. Tom, do you remember a guy named, I think it was Dallin Hayden?
It sounds familiar, yes.
Last year in this game, 27 carries for 146 yards, put the Buckeyes on his back because Travion tried to go. He had 11 carries for 19 yards. And then I think 25 or 26 of Hayden's carries came in the second half. They just rode him to victory. Do you know how many carries he has this year?
I know he's fresh. I'm trying to think if I've seen him on the field. Is the answer 0 carries?
The answer is 0 carries. I'm not even sure. I seem to recall seeing him out there, but he may have been pulled out at one point because we know Evan Pryor got a couple of carries earlier this year. But this is something that we talked about and alluded to before the season. Like, there's going to be no carries for Dallin Hayden. People are talking about Dallin Hayden being the best back on the team. There are no carries for him right now, and you hope that there'll be plenty next year. But right now, with the 3 guys that they've got going, and you throw in Xavier Johnson, who they also want to get involved, however they want to get him involved, and it's going to be a much different performance and outing for Dallin Hayden this week against Maryland. Tom, I have not sent in my score yet. I just wrote one down just now.
Yeah, I kind of have in the way that we have been picking Kyle McCord passing totals in like a range of 17 yards or 34 yards. I kind of have a range of scores, and I can pick 2 numbers out of that range, and that can then be my game prediction. I have not sent my score prediction in yet, though.
I didn't even realize this, but my score prediction I wrote down 34-17.
That's the show before this show. This is you're a day late, but you know what? I can respect the heck out of it. And you know what? If it is 34-17, I will give you an extra bonus point in the bold predictions contest, because I mean, it's canon, man. I can't believe me. No one loves beating you more than I do, but I have to respect the rules of the game, and these are the rules of the game.
Thank you.
Which team did you have winning?
I'm going to go Ohio State. It seems so strange that 34 points at home is like half of what they normally do against Maryland. But I still think this offense is still trying to become explosive and become consistent and become efficient. And once that happens, then there'll be more explosion. I'm paranoid about these loss of possessions, So it's like you're taking perhaps 2 touchdown drives out of the game when you're thinking about these things. So, and we've been shooting way over early in the season. 52 points, 49 points, 23 points later, you look like a buffoon. So I'm going to go a little conservative. I'll go 34-17. Yes, Tom, do you have a score at all?
Yeah, my initial reaction on this before adjusting for the realities of 2023 was 42-24. So I'm going to just scale that down a little bit, and I'm going to say 35-21 Ohio State. And, I think the Ohio State score is somewhere in the 31-42 range, and the Maryland score is somewhere in the 14-24 range, somewhere in there. So, we'll say 35-21, and I will see if I remember this when I send in my score.
Indeed. So that will do it for the Maryland preview. Tom, is that a 12 p.m. Peacock game? Is that what I've been told? No?
Peacock is...
Oh, that's Purdue.
This is Big Noon, right? I think this is Big Noon because they're bringing the pregame show.
That's right. That's exactly right. And sorry, I got upset about the Peacock streaming a week early. We'll get to that later on. But yes, Big Noon on Fox for Ohio State and Maryland. Look forward to that. Easy for everybody to find. So I want to thank you all for tuning in. As always, if you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and hit the like button, subscribe if you would like. Please, if you're listening to this on a podcast platform, go ahead and give us a 5-star rating and review. We do always appreciate that. So I want to thank you all for tuning in, and we'll talk to you guys later.